Viewer discretion is essential. The testimony you're about to hear isn't tabloid gossip. It's a raw, first-person account pulled straight from federal transcripts and laid bare for the world to judge. Names have not been changed. Allegations will sting. If you're looking for light entertainment, turn back now. Everyone else, buckle up, because in this courtroom the spotlight isn't glamorous. It's scorching. Cuba Gooding Jr. shuffled to the witness box like a man dragging invisible chains. The Oscar on his resume couldn't steady his trembling fingers, and every camera lens caught the moment he exhaled, a heavy, ragged sigh that seemed to drop decades of hidden weight onto the polished floor. Beneath the harsh fluorescence, his once boyish grin had vanished, replaced by lines etched by scandal, depositions, and restless midnight regrets. Spectators who had queued since dawn clutched their press passes like golden tickets to a forbidden show. Each came nursing a private hope that the day's testimony would topple a titan, vindicate a victim, or at least make tomorrow's headlines sizzle. Inside, marble columns and century-old would absorb the murmurs until the room itself seemed to hum. Even the court stenographer's fingers hovered, aware that every keystroke might capture a cultural fault line splintering in real time. When Cuba finally spoke, the courtroom exhaled in unison. "I'm done protecting anybody," he announced, voice low but unflinching, especially if the truth hurts. In that instant, the hush inside the gallery felt like a vacuum, sucking every whisper of doubt into silence. The stage, if you can call it that, was his, and he planned to use it not for redemption, but for revelation. Sean was magnetic, Cuba recalled, rolling the name on his tongue like a coin that had lost its shine. Back in the early 2000s, the two crossed paths at rooftop mixers, label launches, and yacht soirees, where champagne flowed like a bottomless river, and everyone pretended tomorrow's headlines didn't exist. Labels competed not only for chart positions, but for control over the nightlife narrative, whose penthouse afterparty would spawn the most viral tales, whose yacht roster would leak just enough to keep gossip pages foaming. If you were invited, you went demure, and you risked being labeled ungrateful, or worse, irrelevant. Diddy, then the undisputed king of after hours, knew how to make a newcomer feel singular. A firm hand on your shoulder, a promise whispered just loud enough for eavesdroppers to envy, and suddenly you were convinced the universe rotated around his orbit. But there was always a toll hidden beneath the gloss. That charm, Cuba said, eyes darkening, came with a silent invoice. Pay up in loyalty, or pay later in humiliation. The setting was cinematic. Moonlit waves, orchids, designer sunglasses reflecting spotlights. Cuba thought he understood excess until that Caribbean twilight. Diddy floated through the crowd like a ringmaster, pausing beside him with a conspiratorial grin. "Got something special for you." Special arrived in the form of Lil Rod, a teenager with eyes too wide and a voice too soft for the swaggering scene. Rod was instructed to sit, to relax, to vibe. Instead, he perched rigidly, gaze locked on the planks, fingers whirring the threads of a borrowed blazer. Cuba's intuition roared, "Leave." He excused himself early, while sharper than the salt spray. He never laid a hand on Lil Rod, never played the game, but the image followed him like a phantom flickering in sleepless hours. "Did you feel cornered?" the prosecutor asked. Cuba's response trembled. "You don't tell Sean no. He speaks with his stare." That stare haunted him afterward, at premieres, on red carpets, in the reflective surface of every gilded trophy. The trap was psychological. Refusal could cost roles, sponsorships, friendships. Studios hedge bets with alarming speed, and the public, fickle, voracious, devours a downfall before an apology. Tears weren't performative. They were payment for years of moral overdraft. The gallery watched an actor accustomed to applause begging for something applause can't grant: credibility. At a Miami mansion, guests surrendered phones, signed ironclad NDAs, and were handed plush robes, spa-themed. The host joked. Mood lighting bathed corridors in sultry reds and deep violets, obscuring more than it revealed. Music throbbed, not danceable chart toppers, but slow, bass-heavy tracks that felt ritualistic. Cuba remembered standing by a floor-to-ceiling aquarium where exotic fish drifted behind glass, like voiceless witnesses. For a moment he envied them. Trapped, yes, but transparent. "I told myself it was eccentric," he said. "In reality, it was engineered ambiguity. You can't protest what you can't define." A photo surfaced, Bahamas, 2013. Cuba grinning beside Diddy, horizon a postcard blue. Guests in the background now suspected to be underage. Late nights, he would zoom in on blurred faces, trying to convince himself they were of age, consenting, merely exhausted from dancing. But denial is fragile under scrutiny. "That picture feels like a confession I never signed," he whispered. One LA night unveiled everything. The upstairs hallway smelled of expensive candles and something metallic. From behind a door came a scream, sharp, then strangled. A guard slammed it shut. "This room's off limits." Years later, acoustic triggers, heels clicking on tile, a sudden slam would fling him back to that hallway, his body reliving the split-second choice: intervene and risk everything, or leave and gamble someone else's safety. On the stand, he finally acknowledged the odds were rigged from the start. Cameras glinted from chandeliers, from mirrored walls, from stuffed art pieces with hollow eyes. Keepsakes, Diddy once joked, but everyone understood the unspoken addendum. Footage is leverage. Phones left behind were inspected before being returned. One producer threatened to go public. His projects evaporated overnight. That wasn't coincidence, Cuba said flatly. He once joked that Diddy had enough footage to direct his own streaming platform. The laughter died when a mutual acquaintance whispered that some of those episodes had already been weaponized. In that economy, trauma became currency, and Diddy held the mint. Atlanta, 2014. BET after party housed in a makeshift basement club. A girl, barely past adolescence, danced atop a table as cheers echoed. Diddy clapped, signaled. Moments later, she disappeared behind a curtain, escorted by security. I never saw her leave, Cuba murmured. Complicity can be silent cheering, he reflected, or it can be silent drinking. Either way, the music keeps playing. Outside, fans imagine Hollywood runs on cash. Inside, the true tender is secrecy. Diddy was a grand banker of whispers, stockpiling compromat like gold bars. If he possessed dirt on you, silence was assured. If he didn't, fear that he might was enough. Cuba painted a vivid image. The industry is a grand casino where every patron believes they're winning until they try to cash out. Chips are issued in secrets, and the house, embodied by gatekeepers like Diddy, never loses. Why now? The prosecution pressed. Cuba's answer cut through the suspense. Because my boy is watching. Children inherit not only our features, but our silences. He wanted his son to know that courage isn't the absence of past mistakes. It's refusing to let those mistakes handcuff your future actions. A birthday retreat in the Hollywood Hills. Guests flew in on private jets, surrendered identities at the door, and donned black and gold masks as midnight struck. Chandeliers dimmed to mimic candlelit catacombs. Music slowed to a pulse. Without faces, hierarchies blurred. Fear, he realized, looks the same on every mask. When he finally slipped outside for air, the Hollywood Hills glittered below, indifferent. The city that celebrates reinvention could not, he suspected, so easily reinvent innocence. Las Vegas, another nightclub, another corridor. A young woman, unnamed, unseen since, was dragged past Cuba, eyes pleading for a lifeline. He glanced away, every moral fiber screaming yet paralyzed. Hands are universal languages. Her screamed help. He responded in fluent cowardice. At 3 a.m., back in his suite, the neon glow felt accusatory. He'd convinced himself silence equalized survival. Instead, it compounded guilt. He recounted the moment news of the federal raids broke. His phone erupted. Journalists, former collaborators, distant relatives, each wanting commentary. He ignored them all and listened instead to his own heartbeat thumping through guilt and relief. The fortress had been breached, and with it, his last excuse for silence. Cuba's call to the prosecution was brief. I have something you need, he said. Courage, he realized, is sometimes just timing catching up with conscience. The apology wasn't rehearsed. Words tumbled out, raw and quaking, but their imperfection made them powerful. I'm sorry can taste hollow in a town flooded with PR contrition, yet when uttered without expectation of absolution, it can shift tectonic plates of public perception. I've paid for my mistakes, touched someone without consent, served time, signed checks, wore the label of offender. But this, he gestured to the courtroom walls, this is bigger than one man's downfall. It's a network that turns private pain into public spectacle and calls it the lifestyle. If my words spare even one soul from that furnace, they're worth the headlines. I'm done being collateral. He faced Diddy, whose expression was carved from stone, and delivered a final verdict not found in any law book. The truth is louder than your money. The judge announced a recess. Cuba exhaled, shoulders slumped yet somehow lighter. For the first time in years, he seemed to walk without dragging those invisible chains. Courtrooms rarely grant catharsis, but sometimes they offer a crack wide enough for sunlight to enter. Cuba Gooding Jr. didn't exit as a hero. Heroes don't wait years to act. He left instead as a cautionary echo, proof that silence buys comfort only until the bill comes due. No verdict was issued that day. Trial sprawled. Appeals await, but a cultural reckoning accelerated. Hashtag sprouted. Survivors lined up with lawyers, and boardroom doors, once cozy shelter for complicity, rattled on their hinges. For skeptics claiming Cuba acted to salvage reputation, consider this. Reputation can be rebuilt in quiet interviews and feel-good cameos. Publicly naming the most influential figure in hip-hop as puppeteer of a clandestine circus is not career rehabilitation. It's professional bridge burning in neon letters. Where the story ends is still unwritten, but one truth stands. The silence broke, and when silence shatters, echoes travel farther than any platinum record.